Hi everyone, good afternoon. Ma'am Nino. We're from Group 8. One of presentations about UNHCR diplomacy in youth refugee protections in EU. My name is Shalyra Andini Tantra. And first, let's start with the short introductions to UNHCR. UNHCR stands for United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It was created on December 14, 1950 by the United Nations to help refugees after World War II. It officially started working in 1951, and even though it was only supposed to last for 3 years, it still exists today because of the world still faces refugees crisis. UNHCR main job is to protect refugees, asylum seekers, and also stateless people, and to help them to find long-term solutions like safety, housing, also citizenship. This role is based on the 1951 Refugee Conventions and the 1967 Protocol. The important area of the UNHCR works today is helping and protecting young refugees in Europe, especially after the big migration crisis in 2015. What UNHCR does in the EU? Of course, UNHCR does to protect young refugees in Europe. UNHCR uses diplomacy. This means they work together with many groups and governments to improve policies and help refugee children. They work with the European Commissions, also the European Parliament, and also Frontex, which handles border controls, and the countries in the EU. For example, in 2017, they published a report called the Roadmap for Unaccompanied and Separated Children in the Europe. In this report, they ask for legal help for children, safe housing and care, and also better social integrations. UNHCR also takes part in the meetings with EU institutions like the European Asylum Support Office or EASO, and also helps create safe and legal paths for young people get protections. They also encourage country, NGOs, and civil society to work together, especially for things like family reunifications, avoiding detentions of children, giving education access to refugee youth. But as global politics keep changing, UNHCR needs to adjust its strategy to keep helping young refugees in the best way possible. And what problem that faces? In 2015, many people fled from wars and violence in Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Eritrea, hoping to find safety in Europe. Even though numbers dropped a little bit after the EU-Turkey deal in the 2016, migration is still a big issue. According to UNHCR in 2023, about 92,000 children under 18 applied for asylum in Europe. More than 23,000 of them were accompanied. They came without parents or even guardians. Countries like Germany, Italy, Sweden, and Greece are under pressure to host and protect these children. Many of them had very dangerous journeys and faced mental and physical health risks when they arrive. That's why role of UNHCR is so very important to make sure these children are registered, cared for, and also protected properly. Okay, let's move to why young refugees need special protections. Young refugees have different problems than adults. The most serious issue is accompanied children. Without parents, they are in danger of sexual abuse, human trafficking, violence, and also child labor. They also struggle to fit into the society because of language barrier, lack of the access to school, and also a lot of discriminations. Many suffer from emotional trauma either from war or their migration journey. But mental health support is often missing, especially in crowded camps or shelters. Another big problem is that every EU country has different rules. This means a child might be treated very differently depending on where they arrive. That's why we need a team efforts, government, NGOs, international organizations, and local communities must work together. Only then can we build a safe, welcoming, and sustainable future for refugee children and teenagers in Europe.
The European Union has standardized child protection laws, but there are still differences in implementation between countries. In countries like Germany, unaccompanied refugee children have access to adequate services, but in Greece and Italy, many are still detained or living in inappropriate conditions due to capacity constraints. According to a report by the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, children are still being placed in migration detention centers, which is contrary to the principles of the best interest of the child. The EU Migration and Asylum Pact 2024 is also considered insufficient to guarantee special protection for children, especially because initial processes such as screening do not distinguish them from adult migrants. As a result, refugee children often lose access to education, health, and are even exposed to the risk of exploitation. UNHCR plays an important role in promoting child protection diplomacy so that policies across the EU are more harmonized and responsive to their needs. UNHCR has made several diplomatic efforts with the European Union. Multilaterally, UNHCR works closely with EU institutions such as the European Commission's EASO and FRA. Through this cooperation, UNHCR encourages the formation and implementation of policies that focus more on children's rights, including in the Migration Pact and the unaccompanied child relocation system. Furthermore, UNHCR also conducts bilateral diplomacy, such as negotiating directly with the government of EU member states. For example, they encouraged Germany and France to increase the quota for relocating children from Greece and Italy, as well as ensuring legal protection and access to basic services. Finally, UNHCR conducts public diplomacy to build public awareness about the conditions of refugee children. For example, campaigns such as #WithRefugees and Lost at Home, which aim to encourage solidarity among Europeans and pressure governments to act. UNHCR's diplomacy towards the European Union has resulted in several important achievements through concrete programs and initiatives. One of them is the EU plus UNHCR Joint Action Plan on Children in Migration, launched with the EU institutions. This document provides guidelines for member states to ensure better protections for refugee children, including access to education, safe shelter, and training of migration officers. In addition, UNHCR also collaborates with UNICEF and IOM, establishing integrated programs at migrant entry points, such as reception centers that provide psychosocial assistance and legal protections for children. In terms of policy, UNHCR supports the reform of the EU asylum system to make it more child-friendly. They advocate that children are no longer detained and that every migration decision considers the best interest of the child. In addition, one important outcome of UNHCR's diplomacy was the publication of UNHCR guidelines on unaccompanied and separated children. These guidelines emphasize that unaccompanied children should not be detained, should be immediately placed in a safe environment, and have access to education, legal protection, and psychosocial support. To ensure implementation, UNHCR is also working with EU member states to organize training for border officials and asylum assessors. The trainings covers best interests of the child-based assessments, how to communicate safely with children, and early identification of risk of exploitation and abuse.
Result and challenges. UNHCR's diplomatic efforts in collaboration with the European Union have yielded several positive outcomes in the protection of youth refugees. Notably, some EU member states have successfully implemented improved child protection standards, including enhanced monitoring mechanisms to prevent the detention of minors. Best practices in child assessment have also been adopted, contributing to more humane and effective asylum procedures for refugee youth. Furthermore, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, also known as AMIF, provided by the EU, has played a critical role by offering financial and technical support to bolster these protection efforts, enabling the development of specialized programs and infrastructure for child refugees. However, despite these advancements, significant challenges persist. A key issue is the fragmentation of child protection policies across the EU countries. The lack of a unified framework results in uneven treatment of young refugees depending on their country of arrival. leading to legal and procedural inconsistencies. In addition, the rise of harsh migration politics and populist sentiments in several member states has created a political environment that is often resistant to refugee-friendly reforms. This political climate hampers diplomatic progress and can foster discriminatory attitudes toward young refugees. Moreover, many countries still suffer from a lack of child-friendly reception facilities and personnel trained specifically to address the unique needs of children and adolescents. As a result, young refugees continue to face barriers in accessing education, mental health care, and social integration opportunities, exacerbating their vulnerability. Looking ahead, the path forward requires a more coordinated and harmonized approach to refugee child protection within the EU. Strengthening the regional cooperation among member states is essential to ensure consistent application of standards and the sharing of best practices. In particular, there is a pressing need for the harmonization of child protection laws and procedures to eliminate disparities and promote a fairer, more inclusive system. Continued diplomatic engagement by UNHCR in partnership with EU institutions and civil society will be vital in advocating for these necessary reforms and ensuring a safe, supportive environment for all young refugees in Europe.